All right, so here we are in the after show, and Kevin, as someone of experiment, and we're going to talk about more in the future about why we're doing this, are we not?
I hope so.
We're doing this on video, and I got to tell you, Kevin, like, your television video production skills may be the reason we get divorced. They may be.
What do you mean? Because I spent like a month setting up the lighting in here.
And then I came in
and
and
everybody said, and you're now sitting in a different position.
That's right, and it's too hot,
no
so I
headphones,
moved all the lights.
And you moved all the lighting, and now there's shadows everywhere.
Yeah, because the lights were like shining in my face. I couldn't see anything. And then I was like, it's lit like a hospital. I don't want the podcast looking like it was filmed in a hospital. And then you just did all this fancy stuff where you were like, go for tone. We're going to sing some tone now. Like, I don't even know you.
Hold
Who
the
are
white
you?
card to your face. That was a whole thing.
Hold the white everyone do their white balance. You made Laura do a white balance test in her country ass house over there in Exeter. Who are you?
It's white balance.
You guys are being harsh.
It's very exciting. I feel so excited right now.
He's trying to drag us into the early 20-teens.
Do you understand, Rebecca, what I'm doing?
Yes, I do.
No, you don't.
No, I totally do. I'm not stupid.
Then you have to like just let me do it.
I know, but I have to say, the way you do a checklist like a pilot.
Oh, there are a million things that could go wrong. I don't know, but it's possible. It's possible in this video that there's the three of us and Toby is being represented by a puppet that we had to insert later.
I think that would be better. Is that wrong for me to say?
It's true. He is. Hello. It's
Could very
me. I'm
well
Toby
be.
Ball, and I'm a puppet. Oh, you can't see it because you can't see me.
my
We're not
God.
on Zoom.
No, we're not. I got to tell you, the idea that if like Laura or Toby, with one of them their video, and just that week, you just take like a puppet, just like it would be so great. Just get a gif of a puppet doing this.
Oh my God.
It would be amazing. It would be totally amazing.
It's so professional.
Oh, well, speaking of puppets, no, that's not a good segue. Speaking of things that aren't what they were supposed to be, I don't know. I really wanted to talk about this article about Ronan Farrow that came out this week in the New York Times, written by Ben Smith, formerly of BuzzFeed. I'm wondering if everybody on the panel read that article, that easily to characterize hit piece on Ronan Farrow. Toby, did you read it?
I did.
Laura, did you read it?
I read all the aftermath as well.
Okay, good. So, Laura Bricker, question for you.
Yes.
What the was the pitch meeting like that at the New York Times for that story? Because all I can think about is like, you know how it works. Like, you have some story ideas. There are meetings, editorial meetings, where you sit with your editor and you're kind of running through the things that you're thinking about writing. And I just think about the pitch meeting where this dude was like, so, I have this idea. It's a thread, really. Just the beginnings of a kernel of a thread. Is Ronan Farrow too good to be true?
Blah.
And his editor was like, yeah, go with it. The fuck?
I feel like
What if Ronan Farrow is too good to be true?
Well, you mean like his beautiful skin? Is it too good to be true?
Yes.
His
is he
luscious
using
hair?
oil of Olay?
What are
I
your
don't know.
thoughts?
I feel like, first of all, from the follow-up reading that I've done, the guy who wrote this article about Ronan, I mean, his sort of shtick right now is calling out media bias, calling out journalists, calling out places he used to work for. So that's sort of like his beat. But it felt like almost in like reading this and then reading sort of the reaction stories and the fallout from this story, that there was a lot of people who were kind of almost gleeful over it. So that's what I'm envisioning in the pitch session. They're like, ha, we got him now. Like, and like, it was like, and I'm like, is it jealousy? Is it jealousy because he had connections and he pursued the story and he got the story and others didn't get the story? Are they trying to say like, oh, he only got the story because of his family connections or because of his history in, like, it felt like that pitch meeting must have been particularly, I don't know. I just don't feel like it was like a happy place to be. Well, it was happy for them.
Well, a couple problems I had with the stories. There were some things in it that, having read his book and having listened to the Catch and Kill podcast, I can very comfortably say that like some conclusions that Ben Smith drew about his reporting were inaccurate. I mean, he says, for instance, that Ronan Farrow writes in his book that Harvey Weinstein was holding the Matt Lauer material as compromat over NBC News. That's not true. Ronan Farrow didn't write that. Ronan Farrow just laid out the timeline of events. This happened, this happened, this happened, and then Matt Lauer got fired. The reader is left to ask that question, like, did Harvey Weinstein have access to that National Enquirer safe material about Matt Lauer? Like, and it just felt like, to me, there were the same kinds of conclusions that Ben Smith is saying Ronan Farrow drew are the conclusions that Ben Smith was drawing in this piece about Ronan Farrow. I don't know. Toby, I haven't talked to you at all about this. I'd love your thoughts. Am I completely off base here, thinking that it's just weird that this article existed and that there may have been some inaccuracies in it?
Cue the Toby puppet.
No.
I just did.
Wow,
I
Rebecca,
just did. You're going
I
to
have
love
to
seeing
say.
the Toby puppet. You guys are going to be so excited.
That's going to be awesome. So I guess I had a few different thoughts. One of which is, I do think, it's just kind of the way it is that when somebody gets put up on a pedestal like Ronan Farrow has, everybody is so, gaga over him that there's going to be people who want to take him down. And I think, there's a name to be made for yourself by trying to take him down. So, I think that's part of it. I think another part may be, that, nobody is as perfect as Ronan Farrow seems to be. I think that's just a fact. So that I imagine that people who have, well, nobody is like I'm sure, Ronan Farrow occasionally has a runny nose or something.
No, he doesn't, Toby.
You wouldn't guess it.
His nose runs Fruit Loops. It does not run boogers. Everyone
that could
knows
be.
that.
But, so I do think there's probably, from people who have to work with him or compete with him or whatever, there might be some resentment that sort of his persona is sort of above the fray of sort of this normal, hard charging journalism type stuff. I'm not saying that that's a justification for it. I'm just trying to put myself in the head of somebody who wants to do a takedown piece like that. Yeah. So I don't know. I read it. The only thing I felt like I could kind of get a little bit out of is that, Ronan Farrow probably rightly, he must have some kind of ego. And that was sort of what I got out of this, was that I think Ben Smith thinks that he's very egotistical and thinks that some of these rules don't apply to him. That didn't seem to be the way it went in when you read the book or listen to the podcast, that it does seem like everything is really strongly sourced, and that the people who are complaining about it not being well sourced are generally trying to cover their own asses for not going forward with stuff. And I think made to look bad, or made to look as though they didn't have the courage to go and do these things because they were afraid of, repercussions that didn't really have a whole lot to do with the credibility of the journalism, but more, facing legal pressure or facing, the discomfort of having NBC being sort of a den of people who, while not quite on the Harvey Weinstein level, except for Matt Lauer, did have their own problems with abuse of women. So I don't know. I wasn't too surprised to see it. At the end of the day, it didn't seem like he really landed many punches. It just seemed like it was kind of griping. And, for something like that to come out in the Times, you'd expect there to be more of an impeachment of really the the main thrust of his stories, which there really didn't seem to be. It seemed to be biting around the edges. And I kind of felt all this way until Matt Lauer himself came out.
Yes.
And then I realized that maybe there was a story here.
Well,
really,
the story is
Because he's a very good journalist.
Being ironic.
Well, it's sort of
Yes.
the story is it sort of emboldened that fake news narrative, so that now somebody like Matt Lauer is like, fake news, it's not true. And I'm like, that sort of culture of distrusting the media has now been heightened by this, so that even credible journalists now are being held up to this, like, oh, it's not, if we don't like what they're saying, it's not true,
Well,
Yeah, I have to tell you.
I think that
Go ahead.
Matt Lauer's comment, if anything, sort of undercut the article.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that was helpful to Ben Smith's cause in any way.
Well, first of all, anybody who's giving Matt Lauer space to respond to anything, like, first of all, the idea that they would talk to Matt Lauer as a source for a story about Ronan Farrow's reporting, to me, that's insane, first of all. Second of all, to what you said earlier, Toby, about, like, the sort of the caliber of the New York Times in media criticism, when I first saw this headline, and I saw it was a New York Times piece, I saw it on, the New York Times app, I got the alert, and then I saw it on Twitter. I had a sick feeling in my stomach, like, oh no, please, like, don't tell me that there's, like, some sort of allegation against Ronan Farrow. Like, I had that feeling of, like, oh, New York Times, like, this is going to be bad. I read this story slowly and carefully on purpose because I was like, I do not want to miss a thing, and I don't want to let my own biases where I don't think Ronan Farrow is a perfect journalist, and Ronan Farrow doesn't think Ronan Farrow is a perfect journalist. He says in Catch and Kill many, many times that he's, like, learning. He's making mistakes. He was supposed to be a lawyer. Like, journalism wasn't his first thing, and he talks about the process. And one of the reasons why he allowed NBC to quash the story for so long was because for a long time he thought that's just how it worked, like in television news. Like, he's, like, in some ways admitting his own imperfections there. And then I read it very, very carefully, and they're just, the only there, quotey quotes, was, like, questioning what corroboration victims did, and also questioning the integrity and work of New Yorker fact checkers. Like, that was the there. I don't know. Kevin, what did you think?
Well, if anybody is going to audit my work as a journalist, I wanted to be the guy who invented the listicle for BuzzFeed. Yeah. And, after all my years of clickbait, I want to be, the high and mighty. Look,
that's an easy hit, but BuzzFeed is also a very, like they have had some really important investigations, and they've broken a lot of news. It is an easy hit, though, to make against Ben Smith, is it not? Like, if you're going to take apart every article that everyone's ever published, he's probably got a lot of things to take apart that are
you mean like the Steele dossier?
Perhaps.
As, a huge example?
Perhaps.
I don't know whether or not, that the Ronan Farrow might be a little too precious. I mean, he obviously objectively did a great job with the reporting. The thing, the troubling part for me is the title, where it's like, it's too cute by half. By calling it, is it too good to be true, is another way of saying it's false without saying it's false. And, I don't know, it's hard to do that. You can be a columnist who talks about media criticism. Obviously, we do that. We talk about, some podcasts that aren't, great, and, the structural flaws that are within them.
I think I just talked about a podcast being the paragon of mediocrity earlier tonight.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah. But it's all, I think it's all very weak tea.
You know what I think would be fair?
What?
I think it would be fair to do a piece, because the story does mention this, and I've talked about this on this show, that Ronan Farrow is probably the most famous investigative journalist in America, right?
Yeah.
It would be fair to do a real media criticism piece saying, like, does he deserve to be the most famous investigative journalist in America right now? I mean, you talk about, like, Megan Twohey and, like, the other work that was done on the same story. You talk about other investigative pieces by, like, ProPublica and NPR and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal that have uncovered incredible things that may be more consequential, like in American history, than the Harvey Weinstein story. I mean, a fair media criticism piece would say, is it weird that we're all so breathless over Ronan Farrow and not breathless over all of these other reporters who have more credentials, better bona fides, yada, yada, yada. But this only looked at him.
Yeah.
And that, I don't know.
No, that makes
sense,
sense, Rebecca. And that's kind of what I was saying before is like, obviously he's, famous parents. He's very well known. And he actually said that in the podcast that sort of, he felt like, gave him a little an introduction in certain cases. So I think that is fair. Like listening to the big criticism from this article, it seems like, was that he said he had the two women on the record ready to go and they wouldn't run it. And they're like, and it was in the script. And they're like, that's not true. Well, it sounds like, yes, he had spoken to them. They had agreed that they would tell their stories. So, I mean, it's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? In the end, the story was the story. The story was accurate. It wasn't, anything but what he was reporting in terms of what came out about Harvey Weinstein. So, I feel like that was a little bit, really splitting hairs there. And I get it. He said, he misspoke. It wasn't quite, what was happening at the time that he said that. But it wasn't untrue that he had spoken to these women, that these women were willing to tell their story. That was true. So, you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like that was...
No, I know. It's
like
splitting hairs. It's a lot of hair splitting because the result
That's
was
what I
the
mean.
result,
We're
right?
getting into
But
the weeds.
what I want to know is, Laura, did you actually flash the stage at that Velvet Revolver concert?
Yes, did you?
I did. I said, slash, it's me, Laura Bricker.
Do you guys want to hear my... Do you guys want to hear my other Ronan Farrow conspiracy theory?
No, I'm just kidding.
I'm assuming there's some puppet situation
There is.
going on.
I hope so.
So my Ronan Farrow, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's just a very easy line to draw. When I saw all the credits on this Wind of Change podcast, I was like, oh, it's Pineapple Street and Crooked Media. It's an interesting combo, with Spotify. And then I was like, no, it all makes sense. Because Ronan Farrow, who was engaged to one of the founders of Crooked Media, Jonathan, who, by the way, Toby doesn't know who that is. Whatever, Toby.
It's Pod Save America.
He doesn't.
It's like one of the biggest podcasts
He's
in the
No,
world.
I
Literally never heard
didn't
of it.
know. I didn't know the guy's last name.
So, Ronan probably was like, I had a really good experience with Pineapple making this podcast for the New Yorker, right? And so when this whole Patrick Radden Keefe thing comes up in the offices of the New Yorker, or whatever, like Ronan, he says, oh, we should work with Pineapple again. They're really great. And then he goes home and tells Jonathan about it. Jonathan's like, I want in on that. So they combined forces, and that's how they were able to buy the music licenses for all of those songs. Remember in
They don't have to buy it. It's Spotify.
well, Spotify
They
has to
play
pay
it
for
and it's
music
like
license.
ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching.
Yeah.
But you remember like how they're talking about Bon Jovi, and they were like, they had this hit song, and they play it like Wanted, Dead or Alive, and this hit song, and I was like, oh my god, they just played. They just played two Bon
Yeah.
Jovi songs for no reason other than because they could.
Because think about it.
was
What was that
incredible.
podcast we listened to that would have been so good if they had actually played the songs, but the guy was like, I don't have the money to buy the licenses. We literally listened to a podcast.
Disgraceland.
And they were like,
Disgrace,
Disgraceland.
which was literally about like crime
Music.
in
Yeah.
music, and
it was so
playing
sad.
the
And
song.
I was like, oh, that's sad. So.
That's a lot of money to play a Bon Jovi song. Remember in Bear Brook when it opened with that little bit of that Simple Minds song?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that wasn't free. You got to pay for that
It's
shit.
called a needle
Yeah.
drop. Yeah.
I love that song.
Toby, what were you going to say?
About what? I don't. So many things happened between when I was about to say something and when you asked me what I was about to say
What?
that I have no idea.
What
I
would
was
the
gonna
Toby
just say.
Ball puppet look like?
I wanted to put like a little bit of a pretty obscure song on Strange Arrivals, and they're just like, nope, not gonna happen.
Wow. What song, Toby?
Yeah.
What if
yeah.
you whistle it?
Can you whistle it for us?
Children of the Sun by Billy Squier. Do you know that song?
No.
Sorry.
No.
People don't know that
It's-
song.
It's like an early eight. That's why I thought it wouldn't be expensive. But
But I heard that the FBI used that song to infiltrate Martin Luther King's family, find out he was a communist.
It would have been an interesting. Choice. It's this weird like psychedelic song from this guy from Australia.
Did they play it at the Davidian compound late at night?
It was probably a little. It probably wasn't heavy enough for that. It wasn't as disturbing as the bunny slaughtering audio that they play.
All right. Well, I have some thoughts about what we should talk about next week. Are you guys interested in hearing those thoughts?
Sure. Maybe.
No. Okay.
No? Well, we don't have
Sure.
to talk about it. One of the things that we're talking about, Kevin, is that podcast, The Lost Kids, which
Yeah.
is from NBC.
Yep.
The same people who brought us The Thing About.
Oh, goody.
Oh, good Christ!
That's one of my favorites, though. Oh my God.
And
Is this a Josh Mankiewicz one?
No, I don't know. I don't think so. But the second thing, I was wondering if we could perhaps try, although it may not. It was a question as to whether or not it's going to drop on time, because a lot of things that I was hoping to review are now being delayed. Is there supposed to be a Homecoming season 2 coming out
I think
tomorrow?
so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe that could be our second thing, and we can just finalize it over the weekend. How does that sound to you
Sounds
guys?
good to me.
Show off.
All right. So Toby sounds super psyched to talk about the NBC podcast. Toby, you like The Thing About Pam. You did. You gave it a thumbs up. Don't say you didn't.
Did I give it a thumbs
Yeah,
up?
you
Yes,
liked
you
it.
did.
You love Keith
You did.
Morrison.
Why did I do that?
Because you said it leaned into what it was supposed to be. And you said I think you said something like, I've never watched a minute of Dateline, but these people really seem to know what they're doing, or something like that.
Are you sure that was me?
All right, we're
I'm gonna have to go.
wrap it
I'm gonna
up.
go back and listen to that episode.
All right, we got to wrap it up because of some battery dying situation. Guys, thank you so much for recording a podcast with us tonight, and we'll talk to you next
All
week.
right.
All right. See ya.